It's the Church of Jesus Christ. So we stop this weekend to pause and remember those that have laid down their lives for our country. Why is that such an important thing for us to do?
You know, when we visit the cemeteries of our nation, we are reading our nation's history written in blood. And those sacrifices and the meaning of those conflicts, they have got to impact us today, or we'll forget the great price paid for us, we'll forget our national mission. So I believe that Memorial Day is one of the most important days for our national life.
We've all been to funerals, but there is something unusually poignant about hearing taps and attending a funeral at a place like Arlington or even Normandy. Why is that?
Well, you're talking to the right guy. My father's buried in one of those cemeteries, so is my grandfather. And any American who's been up at Arlington National Cemetery and watched the changing of the guard, I'm telling you, it changes you forever. And I believe that these are eternal things in some sense. They are about what our lives ought to be about. They're about destiny. They're about purpose. They're about investing our lives in something greater than ourselves. So it's not just the memory of a battle past, it's also the memory of the way life ought to be lived in the broad sense. And I think it changes us. So this is a great time to sort of relight our torches as a people.
Colin Powell said, quote, "We've put wonderful young men and women at risk, many of whom have lost their lives. And we have asked for nothing except enough ground to bury them in." Now, I know people have different opinions on wars and different conflicts throughout history, but isn't it true that our troops have died not for conquest, but for freedom?
Absolutely. You know, we don't own any territory in Europe, and yet we liberated Europe. In fact, I grew up, as you may know, as a military brat, lived in Berlin behind the Iron Curtain. We took my kids there to visit there recently, and there are no American military facilities in Berlin anymore because we gave it all back. We've always done that. Even if we kept some property for a while, like we did with the Philippines after the Spanish-American War, it was just for a short time to right the country, and we gave it back. So our wars have, for the most part, not been about conquest. They have not been about just the aggrandizement of America. It's been about liberating a people, and usually at great cost in blood and treasure. So we need to be telling those stories.
President Trump is certainly under fire for appointing Elon Musk and the activities at Doge to cut wasteful government spending. But regardless of what you think of it, isn't it true that when you think about the billions of dollars being wasted, that in our government, we are actually doing a disservice to the memory of the men and women that have laid down their lives for our country?
Yeah, every American should metaphorically hold the sacrifices of those who have come before us in one hand, and then the ridiculous things that we've been spending our money on in many cases. You know, I won't even get silly, but transgender mice and things of that nature. I remember when I was growing up, my father would say, and my mother, remember the sacrifices of your grandfather. Remember those things and live a different life. And I got to tell you, thinking about my grandfather who had died in World War II, it caused me to live differently. It caused me to think differently, even to, in silly ways, be more respectful of authority, play baseball better. I just wanted to be a better man because of what had come before me. And I think that's what happens to our nation. So the idea that we're cutting out some silliness at the same time we're honoring our past, I think that goes together beautifully.
Well, speaking of government waste, I think it's been identified somewhere near the tune of $80 million being wasted at the Department of Defense that now can be redirected to make sure the core mission of the Defense Department is intact. Isn't that only going to make sure that taxpayer money is actually going to support the men and women in uniform?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And by the way, I think 80 million is light. I think we're going to find a whole lot more. And not because the military is corrupt, but because they're saddled with a lot of agendas that really aren't theirs. But I do think we're making a change in this country, and we're starting to have respect for what Americans have to give up in their tax dollars. And if we're going to be taxed, the government ought to use it wisely, ought to use it with character. And I think there's a movement that I'm seeing emerge in D.C. Towards that. It's going to make a big difference in our nation.
Among the items found is $1.9 million in wasteful spending at the Defense Department for DEI training. What have you seen in that regard?
Well, I have to tell you that I've sat with generals. I'm talking about great American warriors, and they are just disillusioned Because a lot of what they're required to do these days is have a junior officer at their elbow telling them which pronoun to use when they're going to address a sergeant or somebody coming in to meet with them. And it's dispiriting. They want to fight. They want to create a fighting force that can defend America and enforce liberty around the world. But instead, they're having to be preoccupied with social experiments. So we've lost some real warriors in recent years, and I think it's time for that to stop.
It's also been announced that the Department of Veteran Affairs that they will no longer provide, quote, hormone therapy, surgery, hormones, prosthetics, wigs, medical devices, therapy or services such as voice training for trans-identified personnel. I mean, it's amazing that these things were happening altogether. What are your thoughts on this continued uncovering of wasteful government spending?
Well, this is what dispirits so many in the American military, is that the American military becomes sort of the petri dish for American cultural experiments. We shouldn't be putting, even if we agreed with the transgender agenda, which we don't, we shouldn't be putting that on the American military. And they knew that a lot of people were signing up for the military so they could get these transitions surgeries. It was costing a lot of money. It was distracting resources. The medical facilities in a military post or at war should be about taking care of the wounded and keeping people healthy for battle. Complete distraction. So as harsh as it might sound, I'm glad for the grand correction that's happening. And I think we're going to see people signing up for the military. I think we're going to see some of our high-ranking officers staying in the military. It's just a change that's overdue.
So the millions of dollars that are spent at the Defense Department and the Department of Veterans Affairs for transgender ideology and DEI training are not only not allowing the core mission of the Department of Defense to advance, but at the Department of Veteran Affairs, we can't take care of our own, those that have fought the great battle so we could be protected here in America. Why is it so important that a nation always does care for those that have worn the uniform?
You know, Rob, there's a covenant between America and its veterans. You fight for us, we'll take care of you. And 22 veterans commit suicide every day in America, and that's been going on for years. They're on the streets, there may be some mental ill problems, some PTSD, but we made a covenant with them. You fight for us, you go for us, you wear that uniform, and we will take care of you. Not in every sense, not every dime, but certainly their basic care, and we're breaking that covenant. And that's, I think, part of the reason that we don't have enough people coming into the military to supply our needs. We don't have warriors qualifying. So we've got to get right with our veterans. I say that as the son of an Army officer, but I also say it just as an American who wants that covenant between our veterans and our government and our people to be renewed.
And how does eliminating wasteful government spending allow us to do that?
Well, you know, it's one of the most disappointing things I experience in D.C. is to find out what's not funded, while rather frilly social experiments are funded. We all experienced this when there was the hurricane in the Carolinas, and we found out that there was not enough money in FEMA to take care of those people because it had been used for immigration. Well, I mean, that just enrages people. Well, the same thing's going on with the military. We're spending money on transgender surgeries and not taking care of our veterans. And no American thinks that's the right thing to do. So it's time for the grand correction.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Always great to be with you, buddy.